Okay, so the other day I pulled the spark plugs off my bike and I found the back cylinder was running a little bit rich. So I thought, hey, it'll be really cool to do a compression test and a leak down test on the bike. The rule is I make everything myself, so I'm not going to go buy a special kit to do it. So I made everything myself, and it's really easy to do. You need to understand what the compression test and the leak down test does, and it's so simple. The guys try to make it complicated, but in principle, a compression test just gives you an idea if the valves are closing properly or you don't have leaks past the rings. And the compression test gives you an indication where the problem is. If your compression takes a long time to build up, then you've got bypass in your rings, you probably have a ring problem. If you get to a lower than spec compression relatively quickly, the chances are you've got a valve problem. And then what you do is you do the leak down test. And all that the leak down test does is you put your piston at TDC at the top, on your compression stroke, so that you know all your valves are closed and it's a relatively small volume at the top. You pressurize the system and you just check for leaks. That really is what it does. Then you know if your valves are seating properly or if you've got blow by from your rings. So if your compression test is within spec and it builds up quick, you know your cylinders are fine. And then if you do a leak down test and you don't get any leakage, then you're also good. And the specs are all over the internet to do the two different sort of tests for my bike. So let's get cracking. So the first thing you need to make is the spark plug adapter, and that connects to all the other stuff that we're going to make. But this is really easy to make this. You just take a old spark plug, you grind off the electrode, you neaten that up nicely, and then you take a 1mm cutting disc on a grinder and you grind along this line, and then all of this comes out, the ceramic and the center electrode and everything just pulls out very easy, and you're left with the part that you want, the spark plug thread and a little bit at the back there. Then what you do is you take a M10 nut, you drill out 3/8, get a piece of 3/8 copper tubing, you slip it all in. What does help is if you sort of not knurl, but you form the back end, just so that when you push the pipe over, you can get a nice grip. And then once that's all together, you just either solder it or glue it just with an O-ring at the bottom. And there you go, you've got your spark plug adapter that will connect to all the different pieces that we're going to make. So the compression tester is a lot of fun to make. All that you need is a pressure gauge, and you need obviously some other fitting that the pressure gauge goes into. And then you need to go to your friendly car tire place, and they normally have the old valves that go into the tires that no one uses. They take it out of the car or whatever when they change the tire. All that this does is once you pressurize the system, it just keeps the pressure so that you don't lose the pressure, so that you can keep your reading after you've checked the compression of your cylinders. So what you do is you take an old tire valve, you obviously take off the inner valve and all of that so that you're just left with the outer valve. You heat it up with a blowtorch so that the old rubber burns off, and then what you can do is you can slip it into whatever fitting you machined, whatever fitting that you found for the gauge, and you either solder it or you glue it depending on what you have available. And then the pipe for the other side will go over that to do your pressure test to that spark plug adapter that I've just showed you. This is really easy to make and it costs nothing. All you need to do is make friends with a tire guy. And there we go, compression tester that literally took probably about 10 minutes to make. So the leak down test works on Bernoulli's principle. You have two gauges, you have a little valve, a tiny little hole in between, and that's really easy to make. It's just a 1mm hole, roughly a 1/4 inch long. That's according to the American spec, and then just two gauges, one on either side of that hole. You have the one side connected to a compressor, and then the other side you connect to your cylinder. If you have a leak, it works on Bernoulli. So the more the leak, the more you have a pressure differential. And this is really easy to make at home just with 2 gauges. Okay, first thing we're going to do is the compression test, and the engine's been warmed up, the air filter's been taken out. What we do need to do is we need to just open up the throttle so you can see the throttle is nicely open, so that's fine, that's not going to bugger around with the readings. And then here's my little homemade pressure tester. It's in there. Let's see what we get. Alright, so the leak test is pretty much the same setup as the compression test. The engine needs to be warm, the throttle fully open, the air filter off. But what you do need to do is you put the bike in 5th gear and you engage the back brake. In my bike it's quite easy. I just took a cable tied to the engine guard. So the back wheel is fixed, it's not going to go anywhere. And then obviously the piston needs to be at top dead center for the cylinder that you're checking, and there's a number of ways of doing it. You can take out the location nut over here and you can see the line, but I don't bother doing that. I just stick this inside the piston and I move the wheel until I feel compression, and then I can gauge where the top of the stroke is just with a little gadget like this. Just make sure that your ring is bigger than the spark plug hole so that this will never fall into the cylinder. Alright, leak test cylinder number 2. Let's connect the compressor. And oh wow, that's good. It's exactly the same as the front. 80 psi, 80 psi, no leakage. That's very cool. So these cylinders are perfect. Very happy. Nice.